Now, this next section is going to take a little bit of time, but year after year, it's one of the highest ranked sessions of the President's Retreat. Like everything else during this retreat, this is the first time we've delivered this virtually, so thanks in advance for your understanding. It's important to know and understand your authority as chapter president and vice president. Almost all of your authority is contained within the pages of the National Fraternity governing documents or your chapter's bylaws. I'm going to go through each of the 5 sections of the National Fraternity governing documents and call your attention to specific entries that I want you to be aware of. However, you should feel free to read through the entire governing document to be familiar with it, and you should certainly know your chapter bylaws as well. So the blue section, these are the National Fraternity bylaws. Blue section, the bylaws can only be changed or added to by a vote of the General Assembly. Again, I'm not going to go through every one of these. I'm just going to go through the ones that I think are particularly relevant to you and your role. Article 2, Section 1, only males, only men are eligible for membership in Alpha Tau Omega Fraternity. So if anyone says, why can't we rush women or why can't we initiate women? Because the bylaws say only men can be members of the fraternity. Section 2, only undergraduates can be undergraduate members in your chapter who are enrolled full-time as a student at the host institution where your chapter is, right? So that means that in the past we've had some chapters that have initiated men from nearby community colleges or junior colleges. Can't do that. That is prohibited. Only men who are students at your institution can be initiated into your chapter. Article 6, Judicial. Section 1, the National Chancellor. This empowers the National Chancellor, and that becomes more relevant when we get into talking about the Judicial Board, but everything that deals with discipline within your chapter or the National Fraternity is empowered through the National Chancellor. You can think of him as a one-man Supreme Court. He's a volunteer. He's typically a lawyer. Right now we have a judge who's the National Chancellor. And that person is voted in by the General Assembly. He's an elected official of the National Fraternity. Okay, Article 7, Chartered Entities. This explains the relationship between you as a chapter and the National Fraternity. The National Fraternity, and for pre-law students, this may be interesting, right? Because this is very legal in terms of why I'm explaining this. The National Fraternity's relationship with you as a chapter is that we have, as a National Fraternity, empowered your chapter through the granting of a charter. The granting of a charter is approved by a majority of vote of the National Fraternity Board of Directors. And so once you have that charter, you are empowered to operate as an ATO chapter. And as an ATO chapter, you are independent and self-governed. What's that mean? That means that you choose your own members. It means you elect your own officers. It means you make your own policies. Again, as long as they're policies that meet the minimum standards that are outlined in the National Fraternity governing documents, you can do whatever you want to as a chapter, and as long as you stay within the minimum standards and don't break the rules, we would have no reason to do the other thing that the National Fraternity does, is take the charter away, right? So we grant charters, and then you're an empowered, self-governing, independent ATO chapter, or we take charters away, same process, the Fraternity National Board, by majority vote, determines if a charter is going to be pulled, and the only reason that would happen is if there is some violation or not enough members or something else that's not within the minimum standards of the National Fraternity to do that. Article 8, Ritual and Secret Work. Section 1 says that the 2012 edition of the Ritual is the current one. The Ritual can only be changed by a vote of the General Assembly. And then Section 2 says the Ritual, all things Ritual, are on loan to the chapter, right? So if for whatever reason your chapter loses its charter, all the Ritual stuff comes back to the National Fraternity because it is on loan to you for as long as you have an active charter in place. Article 9, miscellaneous. Section 4 says your badge is a property of the National Fraternity. Sometimes we hear from undergraduates saying, I paid for my badge when I paid the initiation fee. That's not true. You paid your initiation fee as an initiation fee. It didn't buy anything. And when you're an initiated member, the National Fraternity sends you a badge to signify that you're an initiated member. If you're no longer a member, we want that badge back. And so that basically is outlined in this section. The next section is the white section. It's the policies and procedures. And these can only be changed by a vote of the National Fraternity Board of Directors. So let's skip over to 6.04. Everything up to that point just deals with the board, the National Fraternity Board, and how it's made up, and a lot of reporting issues and that kind of thing. When it gets relevant for you as a chapter officer, let's skip to 6.04. That outlines membership dues, and you can see that number. And you say, hey, we pay more than that. It's like, yes, membership dues are distinctly different from health and safety fees. 6.11 basically empowers the Chief Executive Officer of the National Fraternity, which right now is me, to be able to suspend a chapter when finding a condition has come to exist or within a chapter that raises a question as to the chapter's viability. Once I suspend a chapter, if I have to, don't like to do it, but if I do that, then I'm going to immediately cause an investigation to proceed. Sometimes the investigation has already happened. My preference is that that investigation be conducted by you, the chapter officers, in working with someone else from the National Fraternity staff, the leadership consultant, Brian Murray and as the Health and Safety Director, Jane Brown as Director of Chapter Services, someone working with you. But my hope is that you all can take care of the investigation so that that suspension can be lifted quickly. 6.12 talks about how a charter is revoked by a majority vote of the National Fraternity Board. 6.21 establishes boards of trustees. 7.02 sets the initiation fee. 7.03 sets the pledge fee. 7.05, after 8 semesters or approval by the chapter BOT and CEO, you can petition to become an alumnus member. 8 semesters, including the part of the semester that you're a pledge or a new member, 8 consecutive semesters. Now, if you decide to do that, that means you can have no more contact with the undergraduate chapter for any of the activities, meetings, or anything, including intramurals, anything, social events that they're doing. A lot of times we'll have graduate students that want to keep their undergraduate membership even though they've already been a part of ATO for 8 semesters. That's fine. You can, as long as you're in school, undergraduate or graduate school, if you want to be a part of the undergraduate chapter, you can do that for as long as you want to. You just have to pay the dues. 707, the CEO, me right now, can suspend any individual membership for conduct prejudicial. 8.01 outlines member discipline. And so this is important because you are empowered, the chapter is empowered to discipline a member, a chapter, or an alumni association. So even if they're an alumnus member, they can still be disciplined for any violation of the bylaws, policies and procedures, your chapter's bylaws, for any conduct prejudicial to the interests of the fraternity. Now that's a very broad legal term that is in there very intentionally. And that allows someone who may not have violated the letter of the law as it relates to chapter rules, but did something that brought disrepute to the chapter and conduct prejudicial, and the judicial board then has the authority to take disciplinary action against that member if the judicial board wants to do that. If they're not paying their bills, they can be disciplined and certainly violating any law. 901, again, the National Fraternity is in charge of all things ritual. 903 and 9.04, all protected trademarks of the fraternity, which includes the letters, both Roman and Greek, the name, Alpha Tau Omega, the badge, the crest, America's Leadership Development Fraternity, studs, believe it or not. All these things are federally protected marks. As a chartered member of ATO, your chapter and your members can use those marks at will. However, if you use a mark that is not in keeping with generally accepted practices of the National Fraternity, in other words, if you put the mark on something that looks bad for the fraternity, then we have the ability to come in and confiscate whatever that is. So, for example, if someone puts letters on a T-shirt that has a big keg on it, or something else that your mother would raise her eyebrows at if she saw that T-shirt. We can come in and say, we don't want our marks on that. You shouldn't want your mark on that chapter, but we definitely say we don't want the marks on that. We're gonna take those T-shirts. All that is to say that don't make those kind of T-shirts, right? Or use the marks any other way. Other than that, you're free to use the marks as a chartered chapter of the National Fraternity. Okay, the next section, executive directives. This is the beige section. This section and the next section, the minimum guidelines for chapter operations, can be changed unilaterally by the Chief Executive Officer, right now that's me, with notice annually to the National Fraternity Board of Directors. So let's skip over to 3.01, duties of each board of trustees. Boards of trustees are primarily advisory. They should not be approving any budget, certainly should not be approving any members before you can give them a bid, shouldn't really be approving anything related to chapter operations. What we do want them to do, and what you should want them to do as well, is to advise you, right? So the treasurer should be reviewing, and the Board of Trustees certainly has the authority to say, hey, treasurer, we want to see the chapter's budget. And the treasurer is compelled to bring the Board of Trustees the budget, and the Board of Trustees can say, you know what, we think there are a couple of things here that we're not sure of, and so we would advise you to change those things, right? The Board of Trustees can say, hey, we want to see the men who you've given bids to and where they're from and what their grades are, and you need to be able to provide that. And the Board of Trustees can say, are you really sure you want to give a bid to this guy? But they can't say, you can't give a bid to this guy, right? They don't have the authority to do that. They are advisory. With one exception, they have the same disciplinary or judicial powers as your chapter's judicial board. Now, having said that, my preference and what we say is that we want the chapter to deal with its own disciplinary issues. As much as we can keep things off the Board of Trustees' desk, and certainly my desk, the better, right? So that's one reason the J board, your chapter's J board, needs to be really well operated because everybody's preference, mine in particular, is that chapters typically do a better job if they're serious about it in holding their members accountable. 5.02, presidents must attend ATO Congress every other year, and if you don't, you could be removed from office. 5.15, every chapter, regardless of whether you're going for true merit or not, has to submit a copy of the annual report annually. 5.17, a member can be suspended for low grades. 5.18, this is an interesting one, honor initiation. I encourage chapters to utilize this provision a lot. And basically what it says is, if there is a man who's not affiliated with any other fraternity that has some special relationship with the chapter, or is some special relationship that the chapter wants to acknowledge. So that could be a faculty member who's worked with the chapter. It could be fathers of current members who are not affiliated with any other fraternity. They're not members of another fraternity. It could be the university or college president, just to honor him with a membership in ATO. Again, as long as he's not affiliated. That you would reach out to those men and offer them a bid. Now, they certainly obviously don't go through the pledge or the new member program, but they do go through initiation just like it's the exact same ceremony that you would use to initiate any member. The nice thing about this is it's very honoring to the men that you ask, should you decide to do that. And even if they say no, it's still an honoring thing to be asked. And more times than not, men will say yes. And so I just think it's a great way to say thank you or to honor or to highlight your chapter's good works by honor initiating folks. 6.02, it's very difficult to reverse an expulsion or a resignation of a member, right? So it's not just, hey, I got expelled and now I'm better and so I want to get back in. It's not that easy. It can be done, but it's very difficult. 6.03, a BOT has the authority to suspend an individual member if there's some suspicion of disciplinary issues or conduct prejudicial. 8.02, the U.S. chapter president are required to or empowered to keep the ritual and all things ritual in a safe place, in a place that's not just sort of hanging out in the wherever, living room or the kitchen closet or whatnot, that it's kept under lock and key. Finally, the TAN section, the fourth section, of the national governing documents, chapter minimum guidelines of operation. A4 says that the president calls chapter meetings, and you need to have 2 chapter meetings at least. Most chapters, in fact, I think all chapters have meetings once a week. If the president wants to call meetings more than once a week for whatever reason, he has the authority unilaterally to be able to do that. A10 talks about the president and the vice president's term need to be for 2 consecutive semesters, an entire year. Those 2 positions in particular are too important to change every semester. It's very difficult for continuity of the chapter. It hurts the chapter if those positions are changing routinely. A12C, election GPA requirements before an election. A14, you as chapter president have the authority to suspend a member for conduct prejudicial if someone's accused of something for up to 20 days. You can do it unilaterally. You don't need permission of your exec board. You don't need permission of the judicial board. You don't need permission of the board of trustees. You don't need permission of the national fraternity. You can unilaterally do that. Now, as soon as you suspend somebody, you also need to start an investigation to find out if the allegations, in fact, are true. That is true with everything with the exception of any kind of accusation of sexual assault. If someone's accused of sexual assault, credibly accused of sexual assault, you need to suspend them, and then you need to let your leadership consultant know right away, because we have a special protocol for dealing with sexual assault, and it really focuses on not further victimizing the person who is claiming the assault, right? So we want to make sure that we're very cognizant of the person who's claiming the assault, and we don't want to do anything that would victimize that person anymore. So just call your leadership consultant right away after you suspend, and we can walk through that process. A15, presidents you can also suspend for anyone who's in arrears, financial debt to the chapter, and that suspension can last as long as it needs to until they're paid up, right? So you unilaterally have that authority as well. A19 says the president and the vice president must attend a president's retreat, so congratulations, you're fulfilling that right now. A20 is a fairly new section, and it is how to impeach a chapter officer. And as you read through it, you'll see it's fairly complex, designed to be that way. One of the reasons that we did this is because we were having judicial boards from time to time saying, we're going to remove the elected officer as part of his punishment. Okay, well that doesn't really work, because basically that would then say that your chapter's judicial board is the primary governing authority, because it at will can remove any elected officer for whatever reason it deems. So really that makes the judicial board the ultimate governance in charge entity of your chapter. Well, that's not what the judicial board is. Your executive board is the ultimate governance of your chapter. We didn't want the judicial board to have the authority to remove folks from their office, but we also recognize that there are times when someone either is not doing their job or they've done something that they shouldn't hold that job anymore. And so we wanted to put a provision in place that actually allowed the chapter to impeach an officer if they needed to be. So as you read through that section, you can see that there are very specific steps that need to be taken to work through that, but it is doable. A21, Membership Education Committee. We implemented this a few years ago, and basically it says your MEMED is the chairman of that committee, and if you want to have a committee, you don't have to have a committee, but if you want to have a committee, there are 2 other people, max, that can be on that committee, appointed by the president with the consent of the chapter's executive board. So at the most, you can have a 3-person membership education committee with the chairman being your MEMED, and then 2 other folks appointed by the president. Why? Why did we do this? Well, at some chapters, what we were seeing happen was that a MEMED would get elected, and then he would have his buddies make up the membership education committee. And this could be, up to 25 people. And when we saw problems, it was these folks wanted to be on the committee so that they could basically haze the pledges. The Bs, B1 through 26, you need to read through these. I'm not going to go through all these now. These are ATO's health and safety risk management policies, right? And so everything related to risk management and health and safety is outlined. All the rules, the guidelines are listed B1 through 26. You need, and everybody in the chapter, including your new members and pledges, need to be aware of these. C5 lists initiation GPA requirements. The final section is what I talked about earlier with the rules of the National Chancellor. This is the goldenrod section. And we'll go over this later in the judicial board simulation, but this outlines all the processes, the procedures for an effective judicial board. So that's it. Usually I would stand and take questions for quite a while after I got through this section if we were in person. I'm not, but your consultant is. And so he can answer those questions. And any question that he's not sure of, or if you want more answers, feel free to reach out to me via email through your consultant. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you might have.